Hey everybody, welcome back to Connect. I'm your host, Andy Hale. Very excited today to have Julia Martin with me. She's a manifestation and business coach, host of the amazing Dream Your Life podcast, among other things. Julia, welcome to Connect.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I've got so much to talk about. I already know in getting ready for this that I'm gonna have to have you back for like a second round, maybe a
Yeah.
third round. I did have 3 rounds with Jessica Rachel, our mutual
Oh, wow.
friend. We'll talk about her.
Yeah.
I want to start briefly where you're at now, but
Yeah.
then go back to kind of the origin story because that's what's really fascinating to me because I'm kind of going through my own journey in life here.
Yeah.
Currently, manifestation and business coach. Your podcast has got over 150 episodes. I think you started it in early 2021.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what you do now.
Yeah. And it's funny because it just continues to evolve and it kind of depends on when you ask me and what I'm doing, which is really why I love what I do so much. It's very multifaceted. I do a lot of different things, but I would say it all sort of falls under this umbrella of helping people intentionally create and manifest lives and careers that they love. So I have my coaching business where I mostly help really ambitious but also spiritually open women start their own businesses and scale their own businesses. I've worked with women who have product based businesses, women who have service based businesses, coaches. I work with someone who owns a toy store, like all over the map. Um, and we can talk about that too. But I really like to incorporate both like the business strategy, which I have a lot of experience in. I was in corporate for a very long time doing business development, but also blending in mindset, manifestation, spirituality, more of this like feminine energy, which can lead to not just success, but also fulfillment and joy and kind of why we want to start businesses in the first place. So that's one part of my business. And then I always had a dream, Andy, when I kind of started this and started coaching, that one day I want to teach this to the next gen because this is something, manifesting and spirituality. We talked about it like spirit guides. This isn't being taught in high school, right? We're teaching kids how to write in cursive and we're
Yeah.
teaching them, all these kind of skills that they don't end up using, but we're not teaching them like the skills for to grow their mind, to visualize their future, to align with their highest path. And so I built a program for high school students. I actually partnered up with someone I worked with at Twitter, and that program was purchased by the state of Hawaii. We're now in Ohio and going into Oregon, and these early adopting states are really starting to see the importance and the impact of mindset and manifestation when we start teaching this to our kids.
I'm jumping ahead here, but
Yeah.
it's so interesting you said that because I was just talking to, so we met through a mutual friend, Jessica Rachel,
Mhm.
who's a spiritual medium. People that have listened to Connect know that I've talked to her several times. I started Connect. I don't know if you know this. I started this podcast because of what my spirit guide told me. Okay. I am a full-time civil rights attorney based in Chicago. Um, I heard about through another lawyer friend of mine, who had her own podcast. Um, I heard about Jessica. I did a session with Jessica. I didn't know anything about spiritual mediums. I always thought I was kind of a spiritual person, kind of an intuitive person, a positive person. Totally clicked, totally resonated. And what my spirit guide told me was that I'm a star seed, for one, and that the stuff I'm doing as a civil rights attorney. So I'm working on some cases now, trying to prove the innocences of people that are in prison. And my spirit guide said, it's great. You're helping individuals, but that's good. But you were really brought down here to motivate, inspire, teach at a much bigger scale. And you need to do this to a bigger audience. You've got a podcast already because I had a true crime podcast, Starved Rock
Yeah.
Murders. So that's why and how I started
I
Connect.
love
Okay.
it.
If you'd have told me a year ago, a year and a half ago, 10 years ago, whenever, that I would have a podcast called Connect, talking about spirit guides and spiritual mediums, I would have said you're out of your mind. I don't know what you're talking about. And so what's really fascinating to me is what you just said. Why aren't we teaching this to the younger people? So with Jessica, I just spoke to her last week and I said, it just seems like if we all have a spirit guide, all right. I didn't know I had a spirit guide. You know,
Or multiple spirit guides.
the first 2/3, I mean, I'm 62 years old now. Okay. I just found this out. So I'm glad I did. But I think most people out there don't know that the concept that they have a spirit guide. And what I said to Jessica was, why are we kind of educating and telling people at a young age about this? So my son, who just graduated grad school, I told him about Jessica, and I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like if I'd learned this when I was younger,
Yeah.
so why is it that we don't like teach this?
Oh, I mean, I think that the whole educational system, it's is backwards in a lot of ways. Like we're actually, and this is beyond spirit guides and spirituality and mindset manifestation, things that I also believe that we should be teaching. But we're also not teaching kids professional skills. We're not actually helping them. I mean, this is starting to change, but financial literacy and it's just very antiquated, our educational system, and no one is really changing it. And so
Mhm.
I think the first step is like really holistically looking at what are we teaching our kids and how is this setting them up for not just a successful career, but a successful life, one where they're happy. Because
Yeah,
that, I
yeah.
think, is kind of the ultimate goal. We always think that it's like about the job or the money, or but we want the job and we want the money to be happy, right? To feel good.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's backwards. We're thinking, how do we set them up for college when a lot of kids don't even want to go to college?
It's funny. I told this joke 100 times before I even knew the concept of a spirit guide and what my true path and purpose might be. And
Yeah.
I said, my biggest fear in life is I'm going to die, go to heaven. I'm there at the gates. I'm checking in. Okay. So I go to the gates of heaven. There's a couple angels there with a huge book. And I say, yeah, my name is Andy Hale. So they flip to the H's. They look me up and said, oh, you were a professional baseball player? I'm like, no. They're like, you were like this incredible Broadway actor? I'm like, no. Oh, you wrote a bunch of novels? And I'm like, and they go through like 10 or 20 incredibly interesting professions that I actually had the skills to be if I would have known or pursued it. And they finally give up and say, what were you? I said, oh, I'm a lawyer. Like, oh. And they flip through like, that was number 172 on your list of talents, like people don't realize either what their real path and purpose
Yeah.
might be, or they do, but they either don't think it's attainable, they don't think they can achieve it, or they don't think they deserve it. And I just feel, just from a simple standpoint of motivation, inspiration, kind of dream big mentality, if you can instill in kids that kind of power at a young age, find your passion. You want to be, an organic beekeeper, go for it. You
Yeah.
could make that work. You want to be a florist, fantastic. And I just feel like, growing up, a lot of times there's such pressure on having what we view as an employable major,
Right.
um,
Right.
you got to be in accounting, I mean, you got to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something that's like we kind of like put in those boxes.
That our
And
parents' generation, that's what
yeah, and
they did,
so
so that's what they're trying to instill in
yeah,
us.
so that this topic is a whole, we could talk about this for the
Oh,
whole
we could talk forever. And I
yeah.
think also one thing, Andy, I actually met with Jessica yesterday.
Oh
We
my
did
gosh.
we did a podcast on because a lot of women were coming to me wanting to start something. I attract a lot of women who are kind of, and men, but going through a spiritual awakening and shifting out of like the corporate mindset and thinking what else is out there for me.
Yeah.
But I think along with what you were saying about the things that hold people back, it's fear. There's a lot, we kind of live in this fear-based system where we're told from a very young age that the doctor, the lawyer, the corporate job is the safe route to go and everything else is risky. And so on top of like never being exposed to a lot of things and never really thinking about what are the skills that come naturally, what are the things I'm passionate about, what are the things that I love doing, what are the things that put me into a state of flow. We're not teaching that, but we're also saying that when you try to do one of those things on the side, that's scary. That's, you won't get the benefits, you won't get the security, you won't have the steady paycheck. That's going to put your family at
Yeah.
risk. And so people are scared to do it.
Yeah. I think the other thing is putting aside kind of the transactional nature, employment and money. A spirit guide to me, the way I would say it is, it's this little spiritual life coach you have.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
can, your life coach, if you're saying, hey, you know what? I'm stressed. Why am I stressed? You'll get feedback probably from your spirit guide saying, you know what? You got to delegate more. You got to delegate more, trust your people, and do less. I mean, I feel like there's so much practical day-to-day advice. I mean, I was getting Jessica would preface a lot of things with me from my spirit guide. She'd say, oh, you're not going to like this. Oh, you're not going to like that. And it'd
Yeah.
be like, Andy, you need to have more fun. Andy,
Mhm.
like you got to
Mhm.
cut back, you got to delegate. And so I just feel like there's such a quality of life component to tapping into your spirit guide. So
Yeah.
no matter what you do, you might be in a job you like, but you're still
Yeah.
just not quite there in terms of you're stressed or you're, whatever.
Yeah.
And so what kind of I've been focused on lately is, man, I guess we just got to educate people to tell them, hey, you got a little spirit guide right inside you that can guide you and lead you if you can tap into it, learn how to do it, embrace it. And I like what Jessica says is we all have the power, to be intuitive. We all are intuitive beings.
Yeah.
It takes a little practice, but it's a matter of, to me, educating people and letting them know that they have this inner insight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and we talked a little bit about this when we connected initially, that I do think that we're not quite there as a society to
No.
like open our minds up to spirit guides, but I think we're getting there with manifesting and with understanding that we are part of this universe and there's a force that maybe we can't quite measure with science, but we live in an energetic world and our thoughts create an energy that then attracts it back to us. Manifestation is real, and we can prove a lot of it with science. And once you start to see it and practice it, and there have been so many moments in my life, in the lives of the people that I coach, in the lives of the students that are taking my programs, where they're like, I thought about it, I focused on it, I visualized it, I asked the universe for guidance and that thing showed up. And I can't explain it, but it's too much of a coincidence or it's too crazy the way it happened to chalk it up to coincidence. There's something else at play. If we can't get people to start really seeing that and opening themselves up to that, then I think the next step is like, okay, we also have spirit guides and they can
Yeah.
also help you.
No, and I think, I agree with you. We're not ready, but at the same time, like I talk about this and I think about it even myself. I'll think of examples where, so Jessica recently had a session with a friend of mine who I used to work with, that I just saw in LA. And it was this incredible, you can actually listen to it. It's the most recent episode of Connect. Her name was Jane Fan.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things of many that Jessica did was she channeled Jane's father, and some
Mhm.
very powerful messages came out of things that, Jessica couldn't have known about
Yeah.
Jane's father that were true. And I tell that story to people, and this is what's kind of crazy. You'll say, like, they'll hear their story, like, wow, that's really crazy. Okay, you want to go to Starbucks? And then like
Yeah, I
start
know.
talking
I
about it.
know.
Like, and now we're talking about something else. Like, no, wait a minute. Did you hear what I just told you? Like, if you really take the time to pause, process what that means, process that Jessica did this, process that she can tap into a spirit. I think if we all just kind of pause and absorb it and are a little more open to it, then the possibilities are there. I'm just amazed that, like, I think people are so busy leading their lives, even if they
Yeah.
hear like an incredible story. about somebody who had an experience with manifestation or spirit guide or
It-
whatever, it just flows right through them.
right,
It doesn't
right.
sink.
And maybe they're not quite ready yet too,
That could be
you
too.
know? But I actually, and we talked about this too, Andy. I'm definitely have always, I wouldn't consider myself growing up spiritual. In retrospect, I've always been a powerful manifester. Like I've always, and then when I was younger, I thought I was just really good at goal setting because I would write something down and I think about it and then it would happen. I'm like, oh wow, I can do this goal setting thing. And then looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was visualizing, I was, preparing for it. There were so many things I was doing that I know what it is now. Um, but what I was going to say about kind of people now is until you can experience it, most of us are skeptical. We're born with amnesia and
Yes.
we're taught in school to be a certain way. I had a session with Jessica where I was still going into it very skeptical, but like very open because I'm interested in this stuff. And it was something about I was talking about how I had this fear of people kind of thinking that I'm too powerful and fear of being judged for that. And so she took me through the meditation. She said, I'm calling in a spirit guide. Oh, it's going to be a different one. It's not your main spirit guide. And I closed my eyes and I swear to God, Andy, for some reason I pictured like the Wicked Witch of the East coming in, green face, big nose, and
Hmm.
on a broom. And I was laughing to myself. I'm like, why am I picturing this? Like, there's no way. And then Jessica goes, oh, interesting. This spirit guide is coming in on a broom, looks like a witch.
Oh my
But
gosh.
don't worry, it's just for effect. This
Wow.
witch, you were actually a witch in Salem and you were burned at the stake, and this spirit guide is telling you the fear that you have around being judged for your
Wow.
power is because of this past life that you had. But the
Oh my,
craziest part is I saw
yeah,
it.
right.
I fully saw the image in my head and I just was like, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, I believe it. I believe it. This is
Well,
crazy.
and I think, one of the things I talked about with Jessica is we're trying to develop a project or two where I don't think it's enough to just, listen to Jessica tell her story about who she is because you're like, oh, okay, so she's a spiritual medium and blah, blah, blah. I
Yeah.
think what's powerful to me, and I think to kind of building momentum is what I call testimonials. So you telling that story, my friend Jane Fan telling her story,
Yeah.
me telling my story. And then when you see these real people who are authentic, giving real experiences of
Yeah.
things that
Yeah.
happen to them, then I think people that are on the verge of being ready or ready are like, hey, I want to learn more. And then
Yeah.
if every day a couple more people embrace it and you
Yeah.
start to build momentum and build momentum, and at some point maybe it just becomes a little more mainstream because right now I feel like it's definitely not even
No, it's not mainstream at
close.
all.
No.
It's like, but manifestation is becoming mainstream. And when I started, it was not. It was woo woo. What are you gonna do? Light some incense and like
Yeah.
will something into existence? Now it's like you walk down the street. I mean, people are talking about it in every
Yeah.
magazine and publication, and actors are coming out talking about how they manifested. Um, but I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
It's just that, yeah,
We are. It's a slow process. So what I want to just spend the next few minutes on, because I know we have
yeah,
limited time today, both
yeah,
of us. And we'll have to, you come back at some point and we continue this conversation.
yeah. Of course, of
Um,
course.
but what I want to just talk about now in the next few minutes is um, what's your origin story? Mine
Yeah.
was realizing this friend of mine, Monica Burkhoff, had a podcast. And then she had Jessica on as a guest. I heard it. And then what's funny is I listened to a bunch of Monica's podcasts and I said it was really a podcast about empowering women. It was called
I
Confidence
was her first
Hustle.
guest. I was Monica's
No
first guest.
way. Oh my
Yeah, and
gosh.
she found my podcast and she listened to Jessica on mine
Wow.
and
Okay.
then started hers.
All
Yeah.
right. So that's amazing. So I listened to a few episodes. I then called her. I said, hey, Monica, your podcast is great. Good for you. I really enjoy it. And she said, did you listen to the spiritual medium one? I'm like, no, because I intentionally skipped it. I'm like, well, that seems weird. What's the spiritual medium one? I just intentionally skipped it. She's like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, you got to listen to it. So that's what started me on my journey. What started you on your journey?
I mean, my journey, I feel like, has really been my whole life because, like I said, in high school, I really started to kind of tap into this power that I didn't know what it was. And I could share so many stories about this, but I'll just share one really quick. I was obsessed with the TV show Friends. Did you ever watch
Of
Friends?
course. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So obsessed with it. This was in high school. I had the coffee table book, and I would look at the pictures behind the scenes of the orange couch with all of the actors, and I would close my eyes and just imagine what it would feel like to sit on that couch with those actors. Twice I got backstage at 14 years old, got driven in a golf cart. The synchronicities are insane. My parents weren't even there. They dropped me
Oh,
off at the studio, and I got backstage, had conversation with David Schwimmer, like
oh my
in the couch.
gosh.
And, and again, everyone would call me lucky
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
wow, that's so crazy. How did you do that? There's
Right.
thousands of people all over the world. And I always knew, well, when I do this thing, when I close my eyes, it happens. And then it wasn't until after college I got laid off 3 times over the course of a year and a half. I was totally lost, could not figure out why my life was looking the way it was. And I read a book called Infinite Possibilities by Mike Dooley,
Hmm.
and I mean, he talks about spirit guides and channeling, but it was really this whole idea of manifesting, that when you get really clear on what you want, and when you write it down, and when you focus on it, and when you visualize and you start acting as if, and you move from that space, you can make anything happen. And that was when I read it, and I just had full goosebumps. I'm like, I know what this thing is. This is what I used to do. And so that began me being kind of like an undercover manifester. And I manifested a job at Google and at Twitter and things in my life. And, it was like the whole vision board was coming to life. But then I realized one day I'm sort of manifesting the life that my parents wanted me to have, or like the life that I was told was the successful life, but I
Yeah.
don't even like what I do. And so
Mm.
that's when I started my podcast, interviewing people about their own manifestation journeys. And that led to people asking me to coach them on the side, and my own coaching business. And then as I continued, it was my real spiritual awakening, because I started just exploring all these different modalities. And I had Jessica Rachel on, and I was like, oh my gosh, and there's spirit guides now, and there's like
So you were
all these
doing the
things.
manifestation before you met Jessica.
Yeah, and and one of my coworkers at Twitter, once I started the podcast, she's like, "Okay, well, if you want to like really dive into this stuff, you've got to meet your spirit guide. You've got to meet this woman, Jessica."
Mm.
And so I met with her, and I did a session, and then I was like, "You need to come on my podcast."
Wow.
And now, since that, Jessica's been on my podcast 6 times.
Yeah, I've had her on three. Probably will have another.
Yeah.
And so when did you go full in 100% into this, like as a profession on
Yeah.
manifestation and coaching, et cetera?
It wasn't even like starting the podcast. It was never my intention even to monetize it. I was sort of at this place where I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I know that my life feels misaligned, my career, I mean. And I had just had my third child. I was actually on maternity leave from Twitter, and I was like, I feel called. I feel this push, this calling
Mm.
to start a podcast. I cannot figure out
Wow.
why, but it was one of these. And now it's like, I know it's either spirit guides pushing me, but I like people would just start talking about podcasts all the time, or I'd be listening to a podcast and be like, you need to start a podcast. And then I'd see a microphone randomly. It was like someone was pushing me to do this. And now I really do think it was the universe or spirit guides or whatever. But I felt this pull, and the podcast was initially just to talk about this thing that I'm so passionate about. And I never knew that that was the thing that was going to lead me to starting
Yeah.
a business. But again, it was people started listening and asking me to coach them. And so then one day I'm like, I should probably take a coaching certification program, which I did. And then I started charging. And then for a while, I was still at Twitter, and I was coaching on the side. And I'm like, I got to make this my full-time thing because I love it so much. And that just, once I went full in, it just exploded into so many new
So
opportunities.
Twitter was your last corporate gig.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was there all the way through 2021.
Hmm.
My last day was
Yeah,
December.
because I saw you started your
31st.
podcast, I think, in February. Your first episode launched in February.
Yeah. So it was about a year after the podcast had started that I left.
Well, I still have a full-time law practice too, as I'm doing these podcasts.
Yeah.
So we will see where it goes. I'm so glad. We're going to have to continue this conversation because I have a million more questions.
Well, you're
This
so
was just,
good at this. You're
no,
so good at this, like making it concise, but also
oh,
I'm so bad. Like my podcast episodes are so long. I'm like, I don't.
what's funny is Jessica, when she said, your spirit guide said, your star seed. And I said, what am I going to talk about on the Connect podcast? I mean, I came up with the name Connect because my big thing, and I've always said this, there's a power in personal connections. And I listen to the episode I've got about creating your own opportunities. And I talk about how I met person A, led me to person B, led me to person C. And I went from like this point to like, now I've produced documentary movies. I've got a podcast. I've had a TV show. But what Jessica said was, your spirit guide says, just turn on the microphone and start talking. It'll all be channeled. Whatever you need to say will come out. You don't have to prepare, write notes, just start and let it flow. And that's kind of what I've been doing. So
I love it. I love it.
So thank you for coming on. We will be in touch for part 2 to be continued. Where can people, if they want to hear more about what you're doing now, where can they find you?
They can find me. I'm on Instagram. That's really my only social that I'm like active on is Dream Your Life Now is my Instagram handle, or they can go to my website, dreamyourlifenow.com. Or send me an email, julia@dreamyourlifenow.com. Any way they want to connect. I love to connect with people.
Amazing. Well, to be continued for sure.
Thank you so much, Andy. This is so much
Likewise.
fun.